Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to stately Vaughan Manor. And today we are talking about Michael Moorcock's Elric once again. I talked about Michael Moorcock's Elric fairly recently because this set of magnificent omnibus volumes was published from Saga Press. These omnibus volumes collect all of the Elric books that were published up to this point. Great set of books. And then most recently, a brand new Elric novel was printed. This was released recently, Michael Moorcock's The Citadel of Forgotten Myths, also published by Saga Press. And it looks real nice next to those other Elric books up on the shelf. So I talked about those magnificent Elric books, but today we are not talking about those books, at least not much. Today we are talking about a previous publication of Elric, the Del Rey set. This is a set of trade paperbacks that was released between 2008 and 2010, around there. And this set at the time was meant to be definitive. And there's a lot of interesting things about this set of books. So let's talk about that. For the most part, the Del Rey set reprints everything that you'll find in these two volumes. The first two omnibus volumes from Saga Press. But it does not reprint what's in here. This is a trilogy of Elric novels that came out between 2001 and 2005, I think, if I'm remembering right. So the Del Rey set does not include these books. It does include all the material that you'll find in here, but with this set of books, for the most part, the novels and stories are presented in the chronological order of Elric's adventures. At least the first two volumes in this are. And then it gets a little complicated. But that's okay, because Elric is kind of a complicated character. But yeah, for the most part, at least the first two volumes of Saga Press's omnibus series present Elric's adventures in the chronological order of Elric's career. Not so the Del Rey set of books. I think if you're encountering Elric for the first time, this is the set of books to read. And if you haven't picked them up yet, pick them up right now. You never know how long Elric books are going to stay in print, and once they're out of print, they can be hard to get. So get these. And also, yeah, if you're reading Elric for the first time, this is the way you want to read him. I think it's the best way to experience Elric for the first time, is the way they're presented in this set of books. But, that said, this set of books, the Del Rey set, is pretty interesting. It's pretty interesting for a few different reasons. And I actually like these books quite a bit. They do not present Elric's adventures in the order that they took place in Elric's life and in his adventures. For the most part, they are presented in the order that they were written and originally released, which is interesting in itself. There are exceptions, though. There's some stuff that comes later in the later volumes of this set that's not in order of when they were written, but it all kind of makes a kind of sense. However, if you're encountering the character for the first time and you're reading the Del Rey set of books, it could be a little confusing the way it jumps around the way it does. But that's okay. It's still really fascinating, this series of books. This series of books, like I said, has everything in the first two volumes of the Saga Press omnibus editions, but they have a bunch more. So, if you're an Elric completist, it would be good if you had the Del Rey set as well as the new set. These can be kind of hard to get your hands on, though, nowadays. Worth it, though, if you can manage it. So this is Elric, the Stealer of Souls. This is the first volume. And it was great when this came out, because we didn't have Elric anything for a while before this. There were some criticisms about this volume because of the artwork. A lot of people didn't like the kind of artwork that was in this initial volume. I like it. I like it an awful lot. I think it's really cool. And one thing about this Del Rey set of books is that it is full of artwork. They are illustrated. And we get some wonderful illustrations in these volumes of Elric and his adventures. Each volume has a different illustrator. And a lot of the well, not a lot of them, but some of the illustrations in the Del Rey edition was reprinted, and the newer edition of Elric, I think this one might have been, but I would have to double check. But it's full of just great illustrations. Look at that. That's awesome. So this was reprinted in the order that they were initially written for the most part. And there's a section in here where it shows the original cover of the first Elric story. And this is interesting. Over here, you have a cover from a Sexton Blake story. Sexton Blake was, I guess Sexton Blake might still be around, but he was a detective, a British detective, very pulpy British detective. But one of his villains was Monsieur Zenith. And I think that Zenith, Monsieur Zenith, who was an albino. Very often, albinos have been unfairly presented as villains in stories. And that character inspired Michael Moorcock in part for Elric. And he decided to make Elric an albino who was the hero of his stories, although a pretty dark hero, it must be said. But a lot of those initial science fantasy issues that Elric first appeared in, we get those illustrations reprinted. This is the first edition of Stormbringer. And that's one of the interesting things about this initial volume, is that Stormbringer is in it. Stormbringer is the last adventure of Elric chronologically. So it's kind of weird when you're reading the series in order that Del Rey presented it to get that story, because it's not just an ending, it is a cataclysmic ending. And at the end of it, you're like, well, I guess we're done with Elric, but wait, there's 5 more volumes after this. What could possibly be in those? Well, there's plenty more, because Elric was a very popular character. This is the second volume, To Rescue Tanalorn. This has illustrations by Michael Kaluta in it, and what a great artist. And so we have more stuff coming up, because Elric was popular. And so what Michael Moorcock did is he went back and he filled in different periods of Elric's career leading up to Stormbringer. And he's been doing that ever since. And so, again, we're getting stories in the chronological order in which they appeared. But we're also getting all kinds of other interesting stuff. This also has an introduction, the second volume, by Walter Mosley. That's really good. In this one, we also get his story, The Eternal Champion, which is sort of Elric adjacent. And we get some stuff like that in this set. Not just the Elric stories that you'll find in the new omnibus volumes, but other stuff that was not included in the new volumes. Because they're not directly Elric stories, or because they're scripts to either comics, or he has a movie script, a movie script that never went anywhere that ends up in one of these volumes. But it's interesting that the Eternal Champion shows up in here. And again, it has a bunch of illustrations. I love the cover of the third volume. That is one of my favorite covers of any Elric volume. This is volume 3, the Sleeping Sorceress. The Sleeping Sorceress for volume 3. Moving right along with the Elric stories in the order in which they were written. And so we've got the Sleeping Sorceress, but we also have Elric of Melniboné, which is the first story chronologically. So if you're reading the omnibus volumes, that's the first thing you read. But if you're reading it in Del Rey, it doesn't show up until volume 3, because it was Michael Moorcock's first novel written for book publication, for direct book publication, for the Elric series. And so he went back to the beginning of the Elric saga and wrote Elric of Melniboné to kind of give Elric an origin story. And it's a good one. And so you'll find that in volume 3 because of the order in which they were written. Then we're moving on to Duke Elric with a great Justin Sweet cover. And Duke Elric is interesting because Duke Elric is actually a comic book script. And so, again, it's illustrated, but it's a comic book script. And it was originally drawn by John Ridgway in 1997. And so it was never really intended to be published in this format. So Michael Moorcock cleaned it up a bit. But yeah, we get Michael Moorcock's script to that graphic novel in here, which is interesting. It's an interesting thing. We've also got The Sailor on the Seas of Fate is in this volume. So we got those two things. Also, this has an introduction by Michael Chabon. So that's interesting. Then we get In the Dream Realms, with another cover by Justin Sweet. This one has, look at that, great interior illustration by Justin Sweet. Just some good stuff in these volumes. So this one has The Fortress of the Pearl, his novel The Fortress of the Pearl. We also get a bunch of other stuff. There's Aspects of Fantasy, which is a series that's running through these different volumes. This has part 3. Has the introduction to the Taiwan edition of Elric in this volume. We get a bunch of different stuff in here. Elric, The Making of a Sorcerer, which is another graphic novel script that was put in here. So again, you're getting the stuff that's in those first 2 volumes of the omnibus, but with a bunch of other stuff around it. The concluding volume of Del Rey was this one. This is a cover by John Piccaccio. Am I pronouncing that right? Probably not. But it's another great cover. I really like that one as well. It's excellent. This one is called Swords and Roses, because this has the novel The Revenge of the Rose in it. Has introduction to the French edition of Elric. Elric, A New Reader's Guide is in here, which has all the Elric publications. It talks about all the Elric publications up to this publication. It also has Stormbringer First Draft Screenplay is in here. So after Revenge of the Rose, we get that early screenplay of Stormbringer that, of course, was never produced. And we also get Black Petals from 2007. And we get some other cool illustrations at the end of this volume. Again, like I said, this edition just has a ton of really cool illustrations in it. It's one of the things that makes the Del Rey set really nice. So there's a bunch of really cool, really interesting stuff in this Del Rey set of books. Again, if you're a huge Elric fan, if you're a fan of Elric, you're going to want to get these, but they're just so hard to get, at least at the moment. I I've looked around to see if they're still available, and they are, but they can be pricey. I have seen some at reasonable prices. I guess it just kind of depends on your luck. They are for the Elric completists, though. For the most part, the Elric saga is published in the new omnibus volumes, but there's a bunch of other stuff in here, like Elric at the End of Time, for example. I think that's the story. That's in the Del Rey set. I don't know that that's in the new omnibus editions. I don't think so. There are things like that that you will find in here that you will not find in the omnibus editions. So you can say that the omnibus editions that are printed from Saga Press are not complete, but they're pretty darn close. But this has all of the extras. And like I said, at the time, this was supposed to be definitive. This is how Michael Moorcock wanted Elric to be presented, which was more, it was more in the order of when he wrote them as opposed to when the adventures actually took place. So you could read this set of books, then the last omnibus volume, which has the 3 books that are not in here, and then this. But like I said, if you get that omnibus set, you're good. But I felt that this was interesting enough that I wanted to talk about it. It is such an interesting and kind of beautiful, in a way, edition of Elric. Great artwork in here, and a bunch of other stuff. I guess that's all I have to say about this particular set of Elric. I will catch you next time.